The crystal champagne flute shattered against the marble floor, its fragments catching the light like tears of rage. Ren Sinclair stood frozen in the center of Meridian Tower's executive boardroom, every eye boring into his janitorial uniform, the same navy coveralls and name tag that had just cost him everything. "Prove you're worth it!" CEO Archer Thornfield's voice echoed through the silence. His lips curled in that familiar sneer he'd watched him wear with every cleaner, every maintenance worker, every person he deemed beneath him. But as Ren knelt to collect the shards, his fingers brushed against something impossible. A business card hidden beneath the conference table. The letterhead made his blood freeze. Sinclair Enterprises, innovation through integrity. His father's company. The empire he thought had died with him 15 years ago. Archer Thornfield had just challenged the wrong janitor. The executive boardroom on the 62nd floor of Meridian Tower gleamed under harsh fluorescent lights, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a commanding view of downtown Boston's glittering skyline. Ren Sinclair pushed his cleaning cart through the mahogany-paneled space, the wheels squeaking against polished marble with each careful step. He'd learned to move like a ghost through these halls, invisible to the power brokers who conducted their late-night dealings behind closed doors. The observation wasn't lost on him that viewers watching from their phones probably understood this dynamic better than the executives themselves ever would. His navy coveralls bore the faded logo of Premier Cleaning Services, and his name tag, scratched and yellowed from 3 years of night shifts, hung crooked against his chest. The irony of cleaning up after men who wouldn't spare him a glance was a bitter pill he swallowed nightly. Archer Thornfield's voice carried through the conference room like thunder, sharp and commanding as he addressed Ambassador Helena Fairfax across the gleaming table. Ren had observed the CEO long enough to recognize the subtle tells of his mood, the way his jaw tightened when challenged, how his fingers drummed against expensive suits when impatient, the particular curl of his lip reserved for those he deemed beneath notice. Tonight, Thornfield's charcoal Armani suit was impeccable as always, his silver hair slicked back with the kind of precision that spoke to daily grooming appointments most people couldn't afford in a lifetime. The ambassador, a statuesque woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and kind eyes, sat across from him discussing some international trade agreement. Ren tried to focus on his work, emptying wastebaskets and wiping down surfaces with methodical efficiency. The accident happened in slow motion, the way catastrophes always seem to unfold. Ren reached across the table to clean a water ring near Thornfield's elbow, his movement calculated and respectful as he'd been trained. But Thornfield chose that exact moment to gesture emphatically, his arm sweeping wide in a display of corporate arrogance that sent the crystal champagne flute flying. The baccarat crystal, worth more than Ren's monthly salary, struck the marble with a sound like breaking dreams. Champagne spread across the floor in a golden puddle that reflected the boardroom's harsh lights, and suddenly, every eye in the room fixed on Ren with the kind of attention he'd spent years avoiding. "You clumsy fool!" Thornfield's voice exploded through the silence, his face flushing red with the kind of rage reserved for inconveniences to his perfectly orchestrated world. The CEO rose from his chair with predatory grace, his 6-foot frame towering over Ren's more modest height. "Do you have any idea what you've just done? That glass was a gift from the President of France. You incompetent—" He caught himself before the slur, but the word hung in the air like smoke, unspoken but understood by everyone present. Ambassador Fairfax shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her diplomatic training evident in how she maintained composure despite the obvious tension crackling through the room. 2 junior executives flanked Thornfield like loyal attack dogs, their expensive suits and hungry expressions marking them as the kind of men who thrived on others' misery. Ren dropped to his knees without a word, his hands moving automatically to collect the crystal shards while his mind raced through calculations of replacement costs and potential lawsuits. 3 years of night shift work had taught him that silence was survival in these situations, that any response would only fuel Thornfield's rage and provide ammunition for termination. The cold marble bit into his knees through thin work pants, and he could feel the weight of expensive shoes surrounding him like a tribunal. Each fragment of crystal caught the light as he gathered them, creating tiny rainbows that seemed to mock the gravity of the situation. His father's voice echoed in his memory, something about dignity in all circumstances. But the words felt hollow against the reality of his position. "You know what?" Thornfield's voice took on a different quality, shifting from fury to something more dangerous. Amusement tinged with cruelty. He stepped closer, his Italian leather shoes inches from Wren's hands as he continued collecting glass. "I'm feeling generous tonight. Instead of firing you immediately and ensuring you never work in this city again, I'm going to give you an opportunity." The word dripped with condescension, and Wren could hear the smile in his voice without looking up. "Prove you're worth something more than pushing a mop. Make $50,000 in 30 days through honest work. Not charity, not handouts, but actual earned income. Do that, and I'll not only let you keep your job, I'll give you a recommendation letter." He paused, letting the impossibility of the challenge sink in. "Fail, and you're blacklisted from every building I have influence over. Which, in case you're wondering, is most of them." The boardroom fell silent, except for the gentle hum of air conditioning and the distant sounds of traffic far below. Ambassador Fairfax cleared her throat delicately, her diplomatic instincts clearly troubled by the public humiliation unfolding before her. "Mr. Thornfield, perhaps this isn't—" she began, but Thornfield silenced her with a raised hand, his attention focused entirely on the man kneeling at his feet. Wren's hands stilled on the last piece of crystal, his mind processing the magnitude of what had just been proposed. $50,000 in 30 days was an impossible sum for someone earning minimum wage, a cruel joke designed to provide entertainment before the inevitable destruction of his livelihood. Yet something in Thornfield's tone suggested this wasn't entirely about cruelty. There was genuine curiosity there, as if he wanted to see how far he could push before Wren broke completely. Slowly, Wren rose to his feet, crystal fragments cupped in his palms like broken promises. He met Thornfield's gaze for the first time in 3 years of employment, and what he saw there was everything he'd suspected: contempt, amusement, and the absolute certainty that he was about to witness a man's complete destruction. The other executives watched with barely concealed glee, their faces lit with the kind of anticipation usually reserved for blood sports. But Wren saw something else in Ambassador Fairfax's expression: sympathy mixed with recognition, as if she understood exactly what kind of man Archer Thornfield truly was. "I accept," Wren said quietly, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. The words seemed to surprise everyone in the room, including himself. Thornfield's smile widened into something sharp and predatory, like a shark scenting blood in the water. "Excellent. 30 days, starting now, and just to make things interesting, you'll continue your regular janitorial duties during this little experiment. Wouldn't want you to think I'm making things too easy." He straightened his tie with practiced precision, his attention already shifting back to the ambassador, as if Wren had ceased to exist entirely. "Now clean up this mess and get out of my sight. Some of us have important work to do." The dismissal was complete and brutal, reducing Wren to nothing more than an inconvenience to be managed. But as he knelt again to finish collecting the glass, his fingers brushed against something unexpected: a business card that had been hidden beneath the conference table, its edges worn, but its logo unmistakable. The trailer park sat in a forgotten corner of East Boston like a collection of broken dreams, its narrow streets lined with aging mobile homes and rusted cars that had seen better decades. Wren's single-wide trailer occupied Lot 37, squeezed between Mrs. Rodriguez's flower garden and the Murphy family's collection of motorcycle parts. The aluminum siding bore scars from New England winters, and the small wooden steps creaked under his weight as he climbed them at 3 in the morning. Inside, the space was cramped but meticulously clean, a habit ingrained by years of professional cleaning and a deeper need for order in a world that felt increasingly chaotic. The kitchenette barely had room for one person, but he'd arranged it with the efficiency of someone who understood that every inch mattered when you had nothing to spare. Isadora Sinclair lay sleeping in the bedroom, Her breathing labored from the pneumonia that had settled in her lungs like an unwelcome tenant. At 58, she looked older than her years, worn down by medical bills that arrived with the regularity of seasons and the crushing weight of watching her son sacrifice his potential to keep her alive. Wren stood in the doorway for a moment, listening to the rhythm of her sleep and calculating how many more months of treatment they could afford before the inevitable choice between rent and medicine. Her prescription bottles lined the nightstand like tiny soldiers, each one representing a different battle in a war they were slowly losing. The medical debt had already consumed his college fund, his father's life insurance, and every dream he'd harbored about building something better than this existence. The business card lay on his kitchen table like an accusation, its crisp edges reflecting the trailer's overhead light. Sinclair Enterprises, innovation through integrity. The tagline beneath the logo read Montgomery Sinclair, founder and CEO, and the address listed Boston's financial district. Wren's hands trembled as he turned the card over, revealing handwritten notes in his father's familiar script. Phone numbers, meeting times, and what looked like strategic planning notes from 15 years ago. Memory flooded back like a broken dam. Montgomery Sinclair in expensive suits, taking calls that shaped corporate decisions, promising his young son that someday they'd work together to build something meaningful. The transition from penthouse to trailer park had been so abrupt, so completely devastating, that Wren had convinced himself those early memories were fabricated. Wishful thinking born from a child's need to believe his father had been someone important. But the evidence was undeniable, clutched in his calloused hands like a fragment of another life. Montgomery Sinclair hadn't been a construction worker who died in an industrial accident, as his mother had always claimed. The man who'd taught him chess on Sunday mornings and spoke about business strategy over breakfast had been exactly who Wren remembered, a corporate executive with vision and ambition. The realization hit him with the force of betrayal. His mother had lied to him for 15 years, had led him believe they were simply unlucky rather than victims of something more sinister. Questions multiplied in his mind like virus, each one spawning 3 more until his head pounded with the weight of unanswered mysteries. Why had she lied? What had happened to Sinclair Enterprises, and how had they fallen so far so fast? His father's old watch sat in a shoebox beneath his bed, its gold case tarnished but still bearing the inscription, "To Montgomery, Innovation Through Integrity, Board of Directors, 1995. Wren had carried it through every move, every crisis, never understanding its significance beyond sentimental value. Now he studied its weight in his palm, feeling the solid craftsmanship that spoke to success and stability, qualities that seemed impossible in his current reality. The watch face showed the time as 3:15 a.m., but more importantly, it represented a legacy he'd never known existed. His father had built something substantial enough to warrant boardroom recognition, had created a company with its own letterhead and business philosophy, had mattered in ways that extended far beyond the construction worker narrative his mother had maintained. Sleep became impossible as questions churned through his consciousness like storm clouds gathering for a tempest. Wren sat at his computer, a refurbished laptop he'd bought 2 years ago, and began searching for information about Sinclair Enterprises. The internet yielded fragments, news articles from the early 2000s mentioning innovative green technologies, a brief mention in a business journal about sustainable manufacturing processes, and then nothing. It was as if the company had simply vanished from corporate records around 2008, the same year his father had died and their world had collapsed. The timing couldn't be coincidental, but the absence of information felt deliberately crafted, as if someone had worked very hard to erase Montgomery Sinclair's legacy from public memory. Dawn crept through the trailer's small windows as Wren formulated his plan, his mind shifting from grief and confusion into something sharper and more focused. Thornfield had challenged him to prove his worth, probably expecting him to fail spectacularly while providing entertainment for the executive class. But Wren possessed advantages that his tormentor couldn't possibly understand. 3 years of observing corporate behavior from an invisible position, an intimate understanding of how buildings operated and who held real influence, and now a burning need to understand what had happened to his father's company. His janitorial position had provided him with access to conversations, documents, and power dynamics that most people never witnessed. He'd seen deals made and broken, watched careers destroyed over lunch meetings, observed the casual cruelty that passed for business strategy among Boston's elite. The 30-day deadline loomed like a death sentence, but it also represented opportunity disguised as impossible challenge. $50,000 was indeed an enormous sum for someone in his position, but Wren had spent years watching wealthy men make and lose such amounts on golf bets and stock tips. The difference between success and failure wouldn't be luck or connections. It would be intelligence, strategy, and the kind of hunger that only came from having nothing left to lose. His mother's breathing grew easier as morning progressed, and he made coffee with water heated in the microwave, planning his first moves while she slept. Thornfield had unknowingly provided him with something more valuable than employment: motivation to discover the truth about his father's legacy and perhaps reclaim something that had been stolen from his family long before he was old enough to fight for it. Premier Cleaning Services operated out of a converted warehouse in South Boston, its fleet of white vans parked in crooked rows like sleeping animals. Wren arrived for his regular shift with new purpose burning in his chest, his janitorial uniform feeling more like a disguise than a uniform as he signed in and collected his assignments. The other night shift workers moved through their routines with the mechanical precision of people who'd surrendered to circumstances, but Wren saw opportunity in every task and location. His route included 3 major office buildings, 2 luxury hotels, and the prestigious Beacon Hill Medical Center, a cross-section of Boston's power structure that most people never witnessed. Each location represented potential clients, networking opportunities, and market research for the business plan that had been forming in his mind since dawn. The revelation about his father's company had shifted something fundamental in Wren's understanding of himself and his capabilities. Montgomery Sinclair hadn't built success through inheritance or connections. He'd created it through innovation and integrity, according to the business card's tagline. Wren carried those words like a mission statement as he began phase 1 of his plan, transforming his cleaning route into a market research expedition. At each location, he paid attention to details that most janitors ignored: which offices stayed late, what kinds of problems the cleaning staff complained about, which building managers seemed frustrated with current service providers. The financial district's buildings were particularly revealing, their occupants treating cleaning staff like furniture, while conducting conversations that revealed pain points and opportunities. By his 3rd night of reconnaissance, Wren had identified the perfect niche: small law firms and medical offices that couldn't afford premium cleaning services but desperately needed better than the bare minimum their current providers offered. The legal practices in particular struggled with document security during cleaning hours, often hiring guards to watch cleaning crews or staying late to supervise, an expensive solution to an unnecessary problem. Medical offices faced similar challenges with patient confidentiality and specialized cleaning requirements for examination rooms. Both markets were underserved by large cleaning companies that treated them as low-priority accounts, providing inconsistent service and frequent staff turnover that created security nightmares for professional practices. Wren's business model began crystallizing during his lunch break at a 24-hour diner near the medical center. He sketched plans on napkins while eating a $5 sandwich, calculating startup costs and projected revenue with the kind of analytical thinking he'd inherited from his father but never had reason to use. Sinclair Security Cleaning would offer bonded, background-checked staff for professional offices with specialized training in document handling and medical facility requirements. The premium pricing would be justified by reliability, security, and personal accountability, values that large cleaning companies couldn't match with their high-turnover business model. Initial investment would be minimal: business license, insurance, basic equipment, and marketing materials. The challenge would be convincing potential clients to trust a company that existed primarily in his imagination. His first target was Henderson & Associates, a small law firm in a converted brownstone near Boston Common. Wren had cleaned their offices for 6 months. watching them struggle with a rotating cast of cleaning crews who frequently missed appointments and occasionally left confidential documents scattered across desks. During his regular cleaning shift, he approached Marcus Henderson directly, a risk that could cost him his current job, but represented the kind of calculated gamble successful entrepreneurs made daily. Henderson was working late again, surrounded by case files and looking exactly like a man who needed problems solved, rather than created. The conversation that followed would determine whether Wren's plan had any chance of success or if Thornfield's challenge would end in spectacular failure. "Mr. Henderson, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to discuss something that might interest you," Wren began, his voice carrying the confident tone he'd observed successful executives use when pitching ideas. Henderson looked up from his files with the weary expression of someone accustomed to interruptions, but something in Wren's demeanor made him pause. "I've been cleaning your offices for 6 months, and I've noticed the challenges you face with cleaning service reliability and document security. I'm starting a specialized cleaning company focused on professional offices, and I'd like to offer Henderson and Associates a founding client discount." The words felt foreign in his mouth, but they carried the weight of preparation and genuine conviction about solving a real problem. Henderson's initial skepticism gave way to interest as Wren outlined his value proposition with the kind of detail that demonstrated serious preparation rather than desperate improvisation. Security-cleared staff, guaranteed consistency, flexible scheduling for trial preparations, and specialized protocols for handling confidential documents. Each point addressed specific pain points Wren had observed during his cleaning duties. The meeting lasted 20 minutes and ended with a handshake agreement for a 30-day trial period at 15% above Henderson's current cleaning costs. One client secured, $49,800 to go. The impossibility of the challenge remained overwhelming, but for the first time since Thornfield's ultimatum, Wren felt the stirring of genuine hope rather than desperate defiance. Word spread through Boston's legal community with the speed that characterized professional networks when someone solved a common problem effectively. Henderson's recommendation led to 3 more law firms within a week, each willing to pay premium prices for reliable service and professional accountability. Wren's reputation grew through performance rather than marketing, as his clients began recommending Sinclair security cleaning to colleagues who faced similar challenges. The irony wasn't lost on him that his success depended on the same attention to detail and invisible competence that had made him an effective janitor, except now those qualities commanded respect and premium pricing rather than contempt and minimum wage. 2 weeks into the challenge, Wren had generated $12,000 in contracts, but the physical and mental strain was beginning to show. Working his regular janitorial shifts while building a competing business required 18-hour days and careful scheduling to avoid conflicts of interest. His body ached constantly, his hands were raw from cleaning chemicals, and his mother worried about his increasingly gaunt appearance. But progress was undeniable, and more importantly, he was beginning to understand how his father had built success from ambition and intelligence rather than inheritance. The business card in his wallet had become a talisman, a reminder that Sinclair DNA included the capacity for achievement that transcended current circumstances. The basement archives of the Boston Public Library felt like a mausoleum for forgotten information, its climate-controlled silence broken only by the whisper of turning pages and the distant hum of fluorescent lights. Wren spent his 1 day off each week here, hunched over microfilm readers and legal databases, searching for traces of his father's company with the methodical determination of an archaeologist excavating buried treasure. Public records from the early 2000s painted a picture of Sinclair Enterprises as a small but innovative green technology firm, specializing in sustainable manufacturing processes that had attracted attention from major corporations and government agencies. The company had held several patents for environmentally friendly chemical processes, employed nearly 200 people, and generated annual revenues in the tens of millions. Hardly the industrial accident victim scenario his mother had maintained for 15 years. The deeper Wren dug, the more questions multiplied like compound interest, each answer revealing 3 new mysteries that demanded investigation. Sinclair Enterprises had been acquired by a shell corporation called Atlantic Holdings in late 2007, just months before his father's death. The acquisition terms were sealed by court order, but newspaper articles from the period suggested a hostile takeover that Montgomery Sinclair had fought unsuccessfully. Atlantic Holdings had no corporate history prior to the acquisition and had dissolved immediately afterward, transferring Sinclair's assets to another shell company that led to another, creating a paper trail that disappeared into offshore banking havens and legal structures designed to obscure ownership. The sophisticated nature of the corporate structure suggested resources and legal expertise far beyond what small competitors typically possessed. Security guard Dashiell Monroe found Wren in the library's legal section at 2 a.m, surrounded by printouts and legal documents like a detective assembling evidence for a complex case. Dashiell worked the night shift at Meridian Tower and had observed Wren's situation with increasing interest since Thornfield's public humiliation. At 32, Dashiell possessed the lean build of a former military man and the sharp intelligence of someone whose security guard position was a choice rather than a last resort. His background included a computer science degree and several years in Army intelligence before he'd returned to Boston to care for his aging parents. The connection between them formed gradually, built on mutual respect and the recognition that they both occupied invisible positions that provided unique insights into power structures most people never witnessed. "You're researching the wrong angle," Dashiell said quietly, sliding into the chair across from Wren's table. "Corporate acquisitions leave digital fingerprints that paper records can't hide. The shell company structure is designed to confuse analog investigation. But if you know where to look in digital archives, the patterns become visible." His offer to help came with implicit understanding of the stakes involved and personal motivation beyond mere curiosity. Dashiell had watched Thornfield's systematic cruelty for 2 years, had witnessed the casual destruction of careers and dignity that passed for entertainment among the executive class. The opportunity to help someone fight back appealed to his sense of justice and his technical skills in equal measure. The hacking session took place in Dashiell's apartment, a converted loft in Cambridge that reflected his dual nature as security professional and technology enthusiast. Multiple computer monitors created a digital command center that looked more like a television thriller than reality, but the information they uncovered was devastatingly real. Thornfield's name appeared in connection with Atlantic Holdings through a series of legal documents that had been digitized but poorly indexed, making them effectively invisible to casual research. The shell company structure led back to Thornfield Ventures, a private investment firm that specialized in acquiring distressed companies and liquidating their assets. Montgomery Sinclair hadn't died in an industrial accident. He'd been systematically destroyed by a corporate predator who specialized in such devastation. The revelation hit Wren with physical force, his hands shaking as he read document after document detailing his father's final months. Montgomery had fought the acquisition with everything he possessed, burning through personal savings to fund legal challenges and rallying employees to resist the takeover. The stress had triggered a heart attack during a particularly brutal deposition, and his death had effectively ended any organized resistance to Thornfield's plans. Sinclair Enterprises had been dismantled within 60 days of the acquisition, its patents sold to major corporations, its facilities closed, and its employees scattered to the winds. The green technology innovations that Montgomery had dedicated his life to developing had been absorbed into larger companies' portfolios, generating millions in profits for Thornfield while creating nothing new or beneficial for society. But the most devastating discovery was personal rather than financial. Correspondence between Thornfield and his legal team discussing the Sinclair problem in terms that revealed intimate knowledge of Montgomery's family situation. They had known about Wren's college fund, about Isadora's medical condition, about the family's financial vulnerability in excruciating detail. The acquisition hadn't been a random business decision. It had been a calculated destruction designed to eliminate a competitor who posed a threat to Thornfield's other investments in traditional manufacturing. Montgomery Sinclair's integrity and innovation had made him a target rather than an asset, and his family had been acceptable collateral damage in a corporate war they hadn't even realized they were fighting. The evidence was overwhelming but legally complex, buried in sealed court records and protected by confidentiality agreements that had outlasted the participants. Dashiell's technical skills provided access to information, but building a case that could challenge Thornfield's position would require resources and expertise that Wren couldn't afford. The 30-day deadline suddenly felt less like an impossible challenge and more like a strategic distraction, designed to keep him focused on survival rather than investigation. Thornfield had probably expected him to fail quietly, accepting defeat like the countless other victims who had lacked the resources or knowledge to fight back effectively. But understanding the true scope of what had been stolen from his family transformed Wren's motivation from simple survival into something far more dangerous: the desire for justice backed by growing capabilities. Wren's cleaning business had generated $28,000 in contracts by the end of week 3, putting him ahead of pace for Thornfield's challenge, but still short of the $50,000 goal. The success felt hollow against the magnitude of what had been stolen from his family, but it also demonstrated capabilities that extended far beyond what anyone had expected from a night shift janitor. Each new client represented validation of the business instincts he'd inherited from his father, proof that Montgomery's legacy included more than just patents and corporate structures. The Sinclair name carried weight in certain circles, and several clients had mentioned remembering Montgomery's reputation with respect and regret about his untimely death. More importantly, success was providing Wren with something Thornfield couldn't have anticipated: resources and connections that extended beyond the immediate challenge. Business owners talked to each other, shared information about reliable service providers, and occasionally mentioned other business opportunities that might interest someone with demonstrated competence and integrity. The network effect was beginning to accelerate his progress, creating momentum that suggested the $50,000 goal might be achievable despite its apparent impossibility. But Wren's true objective had evolved beyond mere survival. He was building the foundation for something much larger than Thornfield's cruel entertainment could encompass, something that would honor his father's memory while ensuring that such corporate predation never went unanswered again. Thornfield's counterattack began with surgical precision on a Tuesday morning when 3 of Wren's most reliable clients called within an hour to terminate their contracts. Henderson and Associates apologized profusely, but explained that their building's property management company had implemented new policies requiring all service providers to carry million-dollar liability insurance, a requirement that would cost Wren more than his total monthly revenue. The medical offices cited similar policy changes, and the small accounting firm mentioned concerns about regulatory compliance that their lawyers insisted required established service providers with extensive corporate histories. Each cancellation felt designed to maximize psychological impact while maintaining plausible deniability about deliberate sabotage. The pattern became undeniable when Wren discovered that all 3 buildings were owned by subsidiaries of Thornfield Real Estate Holdings, a property management empire that controlled significant portions of Boston's commercial real estate market. The insurance requirements and regulatory concerns had materialized overnight, implemented with the kind of bureaucratic efficiency that suggested careful preparation rather than routine policy updates. Thornfield hadn't simply challenged him to succeed. He'd been systematically building the infrastructure to ensure failure, while providing entertainment through false hope. The realization struck Wren with the force of betrayal, though he recognized the naivety in expecting anything resembling fairness from a man who had destroyed his father through similar tactics. Dashiell's investigation revealed the scope of Thornfield's influence throughout Boston's business community, a web of interconnected companies, board positions, and financial relationships that created an ecosystem of mutual dependence and shared interests. Challenging Thornfield directly wasn't just difficult. It was professionally suicidal for anyone who needed to maintain relationships within Boston's corporate structure. The executive who had seemed merely arrogant and cruel was actually something far more dangerous: a systematic predator who had perfected the art of destroying threats while maintaining the appearance of legitimate business practices. His wealth and influence provided cover for activities that would be illegal if performed by someone without his resources and connections. The financial impact was immediate and devastating. Wren's projected monthly revenue dropped from $15,000 to $4,000 overnight. making the $50,000 goal mathematically impossible unless he could replace the lost clients quickly. But more prospective clients began withdrawing from consideration, citing various concerns that traced back to Thornfield's network of influence. The insurance requirements alone would cost $18,000 annually, money Wren couldn't afford, and coverage that seemed designed specifically to exclude small operators from competing with established companies. The regulatory compliance issues were similarly crafted to favor companies with existing infrastructure and legal departments over individual entrepreneurs trying to build something from nothing. Wednesday brought the medical emergency that transformed professional crisis into personal catastrophe. Isadora's pneumonia had worsened overnight, her breathing becoming labored and her fever spiking beyond what over-the-counter medications could manage. The ambulance ride to Boston Medical Center cost $800 that Wren didn't have, and the emergency room physician's assessment required immediate hospitalization for IV antibiotics and oxygen support. The attending physician, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and direct manner, explained that Isadora's condition was serious but treatable with proper care that would cost approximately $3,000 per day for an estimated week-long stay. The numbers hit Wren like physical blows, each digit representing another layer of impossibility stacked upon already overwhelming circumstances. The hospital's financial counselor was sympathetic but clear about payment expectations, offering payment plans that would consume Wren's entire income for the foreseeable future even if he could maintain his reduced client base. Insurance covered a portion of the costs, but deductibles and co-payments created a financial burden that threatened to consume everything he'd built over the past 3 weeks. The irony was particularly bitter. Success in Thornfield's challenge would have provided exactly the resources needed to ensure his mother's care, but Thornfield's sabotage had eliminated that possibility while creating the crisis that made success most crucial. The timing felt deliberate, though Wren recognized that might be paranoia born from stress and exhaustion rather than evidence of specific malice. Sitting in the hospital cafeteria at midnight, surrounded by vending machines and the quiet desperation of other families facing medical crises, Wren reached the emotional bottom that precedes either surrender or transformation. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry insects, and the coffee from the machine tasted like disappointment mixed with artificial flavoring. Everything he'd built over 3 weeks was dissolving under Thornfield's systematic pressure, and his mother's life hung in the balance of financial calculations that reduced human suffering to spreadsheet entries. The business card in his wallet felt like mockery now. Innovation through integrity meant nothing when integrity was a luxury he couldn't afford and innovation couldn't overcome systematic corruption. But surrender wasn't genetically possible for someone carrying Montgomery Sinclair's legacy, and the desperation that threatened to crush him also provided clarity about what needed to happen next. Thornfield had made a tactical error by escalating the conflict beyond simple professional sabotage into something personal and devastating. The gloves were off now, and Wren possessed information that could damage Thornfield's carefully constructed public image if deployed strategically. The 30-day challenge had been designed as entertainment, but it could become something else entirely, a platform for exposing the systematic corruption that allowed corporate predators to destroy families without consequence. The shift from defense to offense would require risking everything he'd built, but everything was already at risk, and defense had proven inadequate against an opponent with superior resources. Dashiell found him in the cafeteria at 3 a.m., carrying coffee that actually tasted like coffee and wearing the expression of someone who had made important decisions during the night. "I've been thinking about your situation," he said without preamble, settling into the plastic chair across from Wren's table. "Thornfield's been getting away with this kind of behavior for decades because his victims either don't have the resources to fight back or they're too afraid of the consequences to try. But you have something different. You have nothing left to lose and skills he doesn't know you possess." The words carried the weight of shared understanding about what fighting back would require and the risks involved for both of them. The plan they developed in that hospital cafeteria would either destroy them both or provide the foundation for something unprecedented in Boston's corporate history. Thornfield had systematically eliminated Wren's conventional path to success, But he had also created the justification for unconventional tactics that could expose his entire network of corruption to public scrutiny. The 30-day challenge would continue, but its objective had evolved from survival to revolution, a transformation that would either restore the Sinclair name or ensure its complete destruction in a very public fashion. The viral campaign began at 4 a.m. on a Thursday morning with a single social media post that would eventually reshape Boston's corporate landscape forever. Ren's laptop sat open on his kitchen table in the trailer, its screen reflecting his exhausted features as he crafted the message that would either vindicate his father's legacy or destroy his own future completely. The post was simple, direct, and devastating. 15 years ago, Archer Thornfield destroyed my father's company and stole his life's work. Today, he's trying to finish the job. Here's the proof. Attached were documents that Dashiell had helped him compile into a coherent narrative of corporate theft, legal manipulation, and systematic destruction of a family-owned business that had employed 200 people and contributed genuine innovation to environmental technology. The response was immediate and overwhelming, shared thousands of times within the first hour by people who recognized the pattern of corporate predation from their own experiences or observations. Boston's professional community was smaller than most people realized, and Montgomery Sinclair's name still carried weight among people who remembered his reputation for integrity and innovation. Former employees of Sinclair Enterprises began emerging from digital silence to share their own stories of how the company's destruction had affected their careers and families. Engineers, technicians, and office workers who had scattered to the winds after the acquisition found their voices again, adding details and context that painted a comprehensive picture of systematic dismantling disguised as legitimate business practices. Local news outlets picked up the story by midday, transforming Ren's personal grievance into a broader examination of corporate accountability and regulatory oversight. Channel 5's investigative team had been tracking patterns of shell company acquisitions for months as part of a larger series on business practices, and Ren's documentation provided the missing pieces that connected Thornfield to a network of similar transactions spanning 2 decades. The investigative reporter, Sarah Martinez, was a veteran journalist who specialized in white-collar crime and had been waiting for exactly this kind of evidence to support her ongoing investigation. Her afternoon report included interviews with former Sinclair employees and legal experts who explained how shell company structures were used to hide beneficial ownership and avoid accountability for corporate actions. Thornfield's response was swift and predictable, a cease and desist letter delivered to Ren's trailer by messenger service within hours of the news broadcast. The legal document accused him of defamation, corporate espionage, and breach of employee confidentiality agreements that he had never signed. The letter demanded immediate retraction of all statements, removal of social media posts, and monetary damages for reputational harm caused by malicious and unfounded allegations. More troubling was the implicit threat contained in the final paragraph. Continued employment at any Thornfield-controlled property was contingent upon immediate compliance with all demands. The legal language was crafted to intimidate someone without resources for prolonged litigation. But it also revealed something important. Thornfield was taking the challenge seriously enough to deploy expensive legal artillery. But the viral momentum had achieved something that individual voices never could. It had created a critical mass of attention that couldn't be silenced through typical corporate tactics. The hashtag #SinclairJustice began trending locally as people shared their own experiences with corporate bullying and systematic destruction of small businesses by larger competitors. Law firms that specialized in corporate accountability began reaching out to offer pro bono assistance, recognizing the public relations value of associating themselves with a David versus Goliath narrative that resonated with public sentiment about income inequality and corporate responsibility. The legal threats that might have silenced an isolated individual became additional evidence of the systematic intimidation that had protected Thornfield's business model for decades. By Friday evening, the story had attracted national attention from business publications and regulatory agencies that monitored corporate acquisition patterns for anti-competitive practices. The Securities and Exchange Commission announced a preliminary investigation into Atlantic Holdings and related shell companies, focusing on disclosure requirements and beneficial ownership documentation that had been suspiciously incomplete in public filings. The Federal Trade Commission indicated interest in reviewing the acquisition for potential antitrust violations, particularly regarding the elimination of green technology patents that might have provided competition for established industrial processes. Regulatory attention was exactly what Thornfield had spent millions in legal fees to avoid, and the scrutiny was intensifying with each news cycle that kept the story in public consciousness. Wren's cleaning business experienced an unexpected revival as corporate clients who had previously succumbed to pressure began reaching out to offer contracts that explicitly supported his legal battle against Thornfield. Henderson and Associates reversed their cancellation and offered a long-term contract at premium rates, explaining that their building's insurance requirements had mysteriously been modified overnight to accommodate smaller service providers. The medical offices followed suit, and new clients emerged from professional networks that valued supporting someone who had demonstrated courage to fight systematic corruption. The financial impact was immediate. Projected revenue for the remainder of the 30-day period jumped to $60,000, exceeding Thornfield's challenge by a comfortable margin. More importantly, the public attention had transformed Wren from an isolated individual fighting impossible odds into a symbol of resistance against corporate bullying that resonated with people throughout Boston's business community. Speaking engagements began materializing. Small business associations, professional organizations, and educational institutions that wanted him to share his story as part of broader discussions about economic justice and corporate accountability. Each appearance generated additional business contacts and opportunities that extended far beyond cleaning services, suggesting possibilities for rebuilding his father's legacy on a scale that seemed impossible just weeks earlier. The network effects that Thornfield had used to isolate and destroy him were now working in reverse, creating momentum that couldn't be easily disrupted. Thornfield's final desperate gambit came through intermediaries, a series of increasingly generous offers to settle the dispute privately in exchange for public retractions and confidentiality agreements. The amounts escalated from $50,000 to $100,000 to $500,000, each offer accompanied by warnings about the personal and financial costs of continued litigation against someone with Thornfield's resources. But the offers revealed something crucial about his position. He was afraid of continued scrutiny and willing to pay substantial sums to make the problem disappear. The man who had seemed invulnerable just weeks earlier was now making tactical retreats that suggested vulnerability in areas Wren hadn't yet discovered. The 30-day deadline approached with Wren having exceeded the financial challenge while simultaneously launching something far more significant than a small cleaning business. The viral campaign had evolved into a broader movement for corporate accountability that attracted participants from across New England's professional community. Legal advocacy groups were using his case to push for legislation requiring greater disclosure of beneficial ownership in corporate acquisitions. Business schools were incorporating his story into case studies about entrepreneurial resilience and ethical business practices. The individual challenge had become a collective effort that promised to outlast whatever outcome Thornfield's lawyers might achieve through litigation. But the most significant development was personal rather than professional. The growing evidence that his father's legacy included more than just the patents and facilities that Thornfield had stolen. Montgomery Sinclair's reputation for integrity and innovation had inspired loyalty that survived 15 years of corporate amnesia, and that loyalty was now transferring to his son in ways that created opportunities for genuine restoration rather than mere revenge. The business card that had started this journey was just the beginning. There were other assets, other connections, and other possibilities that suggested the Sinclair name could reclaim its place in Boston's business community through merit, rather than litigation. The DNA test results arrived on day 28 via certified mail, their clinical language transforming speculation into legal fact with the cold precision of scientific methodology. Wren stared at the laboratory letterhead and genetic markers that confirmed what the documentary evidence had suggested. He was definitively Montgomery Sinclair's biological son and legal heir to any assets that survived Thornfield's systematic dismantling of Sinclair Enterprises. The test had been suggested by Sarah Martinez's investigative team as a way to strengthen his legal standing for any potential lawsuits. But the results carried implications that extended far beyond media credibility. Somewhere in Boston's labyrinthine corporate structures, assets bearing the Sinclair name might still exist, protected by legal frameworks that Thornfield hadn't been able to penetrate completely. Dashiell's research had uncovered something extraordinary buried in the Massachusetts Secretary of State's corporate archives. A trust document filed 3 months before Montgomery's death that transferred core Sinclair Enterprises assets into a legal structure designed to survive hostile acquisition. The Sinclair Innovation Trust had been established with specific provisions that required biological heirs to activate its protections, suggesting that Montgomery had anticipated the attack on his company and prepared defensive measures that his wife either hadn't known about or hadn't understood how to access. The trust controlled several key patents, a significant cash reserve, and most importantly, the legal right to reclaim any assets that had been transferred through fraudulent or coercive means within a 20-year window. The law firm of Pemberton, Hayes & Associates occupied the 34th floor of One Boston Place, its mahogany-paneled conference room offering a commanding view of the harbor where merchant ships had once brought prosperity to New England's entrepreneurial families. Senior partner Victoria Pemberton was a woman in her 60s who specialized in complex commercial litigation and had known Montgomery Sinclair professionally before his death. Her silver hair was pulled back severely, and her navy suit projected the kind of authority that came from decades of winning cases against opponents who underestimated her capabilities. She reviewed Wren's documentation with the methodical precision of someone who understood exactly how corporate warfare was conducted in contemporary America. "Your father was more prepared than anyone realized," Pemberton explained, spreading trust documents across the conference table like battle plans. The Sinclair Innovation Trust was designed specifically to survive the kind of acquisition tactics that Thornfield employed. Montgomery anticipated that traditional corporate structures wouldn't protect his innovations from predatory competitors, so he created a legal framework that could only be activated by family members with both genetic and documentary proof of relationship. She paused, studying Wren's face, with the appraising look of someone evaluating potential assets. The trust controls approximately 43 patents, $12 million in cash reserves, and legal claims to any intellectual property that was transferred without proper compensation to beneficial owners. The implications were staggering and immediate. Wren wasn't just fighting for justice about past wrongs. He was potentially reclaiming current assets worth tens of millions of dollars that Thornfield had been exploiting for 15 years without legal authority. The patents alone generated annual licensing revenues exceeding $2 million, money that should have been flowing to Montgomery's estate rather than Thornfield's investment portfolio. The cash reserves had been growing with compound interest for over a decade, creating a war chest that could fund litigation against opponents who had previously seemed financially invincible. Most importantly, the trust's legal standing was unassailable. Thornfield's acquisition of Sinclair Enterprises hadn't included the assets controlled by the trust because he hadn't known they existed. Thornfield's response to the trust activation was immediate and desperate, escalating from legal threats to personal intimidation with the kind of panic that suggested he understood exactly how much was at stake. Private investigators began following Wren and his mother, photographing their activities and attempting to gather information that might be used for character assassination, or worse. Threatening phone calls to the trailer park intensified, and Premier Cleaning Services received anonymous complaints about employee conduct that were obviously designed to jeopardize his remaining employment. The escalation revealed something crucial about Thornfield's position. He had built portions of his current empire on assets that weren't legally his, and exposure of that theft could trigger investigations into other questionable acquisitions. The confrontation that would determine everything was scheduled for Monday morning in Meridian Tower's executive boardroom, the same space where Thornfield had issued his original challenge 30 days earlier. Pemberton had insisted on the meeting location as a psychological tactic, using Thornfield's own territory to demonstrate that his control was no longer absolute. The agenda was simple but devastating: presentation of trust documents, demand for immediate cessation of patent usage, and negotiation of compensation for 15 years of unauthorized intellectual property exploitation. Thornfield's legal team had requested the meeting in hopes of negotiating a private settlement that would avoid public revelation of the trust's existence and implications for his other business activities. Wren arrived at Meridian Tower wearing a suit that Dashiell had helped him select. Charcoal gray wool that projected competence without ostentation, appropriate for someone reclaiming a legacy rather than begging for consideration. The elevator ride to the 62nd floor felt different now. Ascending not as a service provider seeking approval, but as a principal with legitimate claims to assets and respect. The security guards who had previously ignored him now watched with expressions that suggested they understood the power dynamics were shifting in ways that might affect their own employment. The marble floors and mahogany panels that had once intimidated him now seemed like appropriate settings for the kind of business his father had conducted successfully for decades. Thornfield waited in the boardroom with 3 lawyers and an expression that combined rage with something approaching genuine fear. His usual composed arrogance had been replaced by the tight-lipped tension of someone who had discovered that his carefully constructed world contained vulnerabilities he hadn't anticipated. The crystal champagne glasses were absent this time, replaced by legal documents and financial statements that would determine the distribution of millions of dollars in assets and revenue streams. Ambassador Fairfax was notably absent, whether by choice or diplomatic necessity, leaving only the principal combatants and their legal representatives to determine the outcome of a conflict that had been building for 15 years. The document presentation took 43 minutes and resulted in complete silence from Thornfield's legal team as they absorbed the implications of Montgomery's posthumous strategy. The trust was legally unassailable, the patents were legitimately controlled, and the revenue claims were mathematically precise. Wren wasn't seeking charity or sympathy. He was presenting an invoice for intellectual property theft that included compound interest and punitive damages that exceeded Thornfield's liquid assets. The man who had destroyed his family through systematic corporate predation was now facing the possibility of his own financial destruction through legitimate legal mechanisms. Thornfield's final offer was everything: complete return of patent rights, payment of accumulated licensing revenues, and a public apology acknowledging the wrongful acquisition of Sinclair Enterprises' assets. In exchange, Wren would accept confidentiality agreements preventing disclosure of other Thornfield business practices and agree to limit his legal claims to the specific Sinclair-related matters. It was surrender disguised as negotiation, an acknowledgement that continuing to fight would result in total destruction of Thornfield's business empire through regulatory scrutiny that he couldn't survive. The 30-day challenge that was supposed to end in humiliation and failure had instead become the catalyst for one of the most complete reversals of fortune in Boston's corporate history. 6 months later, Wren Sinclair stood behind the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office in the newly renovated Sinclair Tower, watching the evening rush-hour traffic flow through downtown Boston like blood through corporate arteries. The building had once housed Thornfield's secondary headquarters before financial necessity forced him to liquidate assets for legal settlements and regulatory fines. The irony of occupying space that had previously belonged to his family's destroyer wasn't lost on Wren, but the symbolism felt appropriate rather than vindictive. Sinclair Enterprises had been rebuilt on the foundation of justice rather than revenge, though the distinction was sometimes difficult to maintain when surveying the completeness of his enemy's downfall. The new company occupied 12 floors of prime real estate in Boston's financial district, its glass and steel facade bearing the restored Sinclair logo that Montgomery had designed 30 years earlier. Innovation through integrity was etched into the marble lobby in letters that caught morning sunlight like a daily reminder of the values that would guide every business decision. The architectural firm had restored the lobby's original grandeur while incorporating modern sustainability features that reflected the company's continued commitment to environmental innovation. Employees moved through the space with the purposeful energy of people who understood they were participating in something larger than routine corporate employment. They were rebuilding a legacy that had been stolen and nearly lost forever. Thornfield's fall had been as spectacular as his arrogance had suggested was impossible. A systematic dismantling of wealth and influence, that mirrored what he had done to Montgomery's company 15 years earlier. Federal investigations triggered by the viral campaign had revealed a pattern of fraudulent acquisitions spanning 2 decades, resulting in criminal charges that included securities fraud, tax evasion, and racketeering under organized crime statutes. His corporate empire had been liquidated to pay restitution to victims, and his personal assets had been seized under asset forfeiture laws designed to prevent criminals from profiting from illegal activities. The man who had once commanded respect through fear and wealth now worked as a night shift security guard at a downtown parking garage, his former employees having declined to provide references for better positions. Isadora Sinclair's health had stabilized dramatically once financial stress was removed from their family equation. Her recovery aided by access to premium medical care and the peace of mind that came from knowing her son had reclaimed his birthright. She occupied a beautiful apartment in Beacon Hill that overlooked the Common, its rooms filled with photographs and documents that told the story of Montgomery's achievements and the family legacy that had survived systematic attempts at destruction. Her pride in Wren's accomplishments was evident in every conversation, but she had also insisted on establishing a foundation dedicated to helping other families who faced corporate bullying and had nowhere else to turn for assistance. The foundation operated from offices adjacent to Sinclair Enterprises, creating a visible commitment to justice that extended beyond their personal experience. Dashiell Monroe had accepted the position of Chief Technology Officer with enthusiasm and capabilities that exceeded even Wren's optimistic expectations. His background in military intelligence and computer security provided exactly the expertise needed to protect Sinclair Enterprises from the kind of corporate espionage that had contributed to his father's downfall. More importantly, his friendship had evolved into a partnership based on shared values and complementary skills that suggested the company's leadership team could withstand whatever challenges future competitors might attempt. Their collaboration was built on mutual respect rather than hierarchy, creating a corporate culture that reflected integrity in interpersonal relationships as well as business practices. The original green technology patents had formed the foundation for expanded research and development that attracted top talent from across the country. Engineers and scientists who had been frustrated by corporate environments that prioritized profit over environmental impact found in Sinclair Enterprises a company that could pursue both objectives simultaneously. The company's innovations in sustainable manufacturing had attracted contracts from major corporations and government agencies that needed to meet environmental compliance requirements without sacrificing operational efficiency. Revenue projections for the first full year exceeded $50 million, making it one of Boston's fastest-growing technology companies and a legitimate competitor in markets that had previously been dominated by established players. But the most satisfying aspect of the company's success was its commitment to treating employees with the dignity and respect that Wren had been denied during his years as a janitor. Every worker received comprehensive health insurance, profit-sharing opportunities, and educational support for career advancement. The cleaning staff was employed directly rather than contracted through third-party services, ensuring fair wages and job security for people whose work was essential but often undervalued. The company cafeteria served meals prepared by professional chefs rather than vending machine offerings, and the facilities included a fitness center and childcare services that recognized employees' needs beyond their immediate work responsibilities. The 30-day challenge had officially ended with Wren earning $68,000 through his cleaning business, exceeding Thornfield's requirement while building the network that would become crucial for his larger business ventures. The cleaning company continued operating as a subsidiary of Sinclair Enterprises, providing employment for former Premier Cleaning Services workers who had supported him during the darkest periods of his struggle. Several of his original clients had become major customers for Sinclair Enterprises' environmental consulting services, creating business relationships that extended far beyond their initial janitorial contracts. The humble beginning had evolved into something much larger than anyone could have anticipated when he first kneeled to collect crystal fragments from a boardroom floor. The business card that had started his journey to reclaim his father's legacy now sat framed on his desk, its worn edges a reminder of how close the truth had come to being lost forever. Next to it was a photograph of Montgomery Sinclair at his own desk 30 years earlier, his expression reflecting the confident optimism of someone who believed that integrity and innovation could create lasting value in a competitive world. The resemblance between father and son was unmistakable. The same intelligent eyes, the same determined jaw, the same subtle smile that suggested awareness of possibilities that others couldn't yet see. The legacy was visible in more than just corporate assets. It lived in the values and capabilities that had enabled Wren to transform destruction into restoration. Sarah Martinez's investigative series had won a Pulitzer Prize for exposing systematic corporate corruption in New England's business community, her reporting catalyzing legislative reforms that strengthened disclosure requirements and increased penalties for fraudulent acquisition practices. The series continued to generate speaking engagements and consulting opportunities for Wren, who had become a recognized expert on entrepreneurial resilience and corporate accountability. Universities invited him to lecture about business ethics and family legacy, and his story was being developed into a documentary that would reach audiences far beyond Boston's professional community. The personal had become political in the best possible way. Individual justice had contributed to systemic reform that would benefit countless future victims of corporate predation. Standing in his corner office as darkness fell over the city, Wren remembered Thornfield's mocking challenge. "Prove you're worth it." The words had been intended to humiliate and destroy, but they had instead become a rallying cry for reconstruction and justice. He had proven his worth not through submission to impossible odds, but through the intelligence, integrity, and determination that comprised his father's true inheritance. The crystal champagne glass that had shattered 6 months earlier had been replaced by something much more valuable, a legacy restored, a family honored, and a future built on foundations that no corporate predator could destroy again. The last visitor to leave Sinclair Tower each evening was always Wren himself, who turned off the lights and locked the doors with the same careful attention to detail that had once characterized his janitorial duties. The building's security guard, a young woman working her way through law school, always wished him good night with the respect due to someone who understood that dignity wasn't determined by job titles or salary levels. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but tonight was for satisfaction at work completed and promises kept to a father who had deserved better than the hand he'd been dealt. The janitor's uniform was gone forever, burned in a ceremonial fire that had marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. But the values it had represented, honest work, quiet dignity, and careful observation of how power operated, those remained as essential components of who Wren Sinclair had become and who he intended to remain. The end. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is building something better than what was destroyed. If you're reading this story from your own corporate journey, comment below and share where you're watching from. Because every underdog story starts with someone who refuses to accept that their current circumstances define their ultimate potential.